afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our first Q&A with me, and I hope you'll all bear with me because this is my very first time using Facebook Live, and so forgive me if I'm bumble through it a little bit. So this is how it's going to work. In the days leading up to this event, we reached out and asked for anybody who had questions, and so I have some of your questions here that I'm going to use to try to make sure that I cover as much of those pre-submitted questions as possible. But we are also going to take questions in real time through our website at everettwa.gov/ask Cassie. Again, that's everettwa.gov/ask Cassie. To make it easier, I think we put the link on the bottom of the post and pinned it in the comment section as well. I want to try to respond to as many questions as I can. So I'm not going to be taking questions in the comment section because the comment section, things can get buried a little bit. And that's what I worry about. If as folks are having that dialogue, questions can get buried and I may not see them. So if you email those questions, that's the best way to do it. So with that, I'm going to get started. So in the questions that I received prior to today, most of them have been related to 3 different topics. And so those topics are Everett Police, training policies and practices, not surprising with the tragic world events that we're seeing across our nation right now. And so I will address those questions first. I also got a number of questions on our city budget. So I want to take some time to talk a little bit about some of our budget cuts that we've had to make and whether there's additional cuts coming. And then if there's time, I'll answer some questions about COVID and again, any questions that we can in real time. So to start with a topic that is weighing on so many of us around the injustice and racism and violence that we've been witnessing in our country, especially against Black men. For me personally, it has filled me with horror and grief, and I've had to have a lot of really difficult conversations with my daughter, with my family, and with our community as it relates to this topic. I think what we're seeing is built up over 400 years of racism and oppression and what that's done to our country. So as a city, we've been working to strengthen our actions to address institutional racism. We started that work a few years ago. We want to ensure that our policies and practices are those of equity and inclusion, but I can tell you we have a lot more work to do. So many of the questions that I got for today were specifically regarding Everett Police Department's training, policies, and practices. And I want to assure you that both Chief Templeman and I have zero tolerance for unnecessary force, abuse of power, racially motivated aggression, especially for anybody at the city, but especially our police officers. And for our police department, I think it's of utmost importance that we work to build and maintain public trust. And so for us at the city, there's a few ways that we are trying to do that. I'll start with recruitment. When we recruit officers to the city of Everett, they're vetted to ensure that they don't have a history of abuse, racism, xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia, or discrimination. The screening also includes background checks, polygraph exams, psychological examinations, criminal background history, drug screening, and a number of other things. We also place a very high value on training, and I'm very proud that our department officers are some of the best trained in the country. Every officer in the Everett Police Department receives 40 hours of crisis intervention or de-escalation training. This is far above the state requirement, which I think is important, and we will continue to focus our energies on de-escalation training. Our officers also receive training on bias-based policing, implicit bias, use of force, procedural justice, and very important, the duty to render first aid. The team also participates in scenario training. We have a firearm simulator, and through that program, we test the officers' decision-making ability in a number of scenarios, including use of force in areas where use of force is really not warranted. And so that's a really helpful training tool that we have as well. But I think one of the most important things that we can do with our officers right now is cultivating and building those community connections and building that trust that I talked about initially. and that goes way beyond law enforcement. That is really having our officers available and approachable in our community. We've embedded social workers to work alongside with our officers, recognizing that our officers are not social workers, that social workers are much better suited to do that job. And so they're out there with our officers to help when we're working with those in the public that are struggling with mental illness or addiction, homelessness, things like that. We also have, as I hope you and many in the community knows, we have youth and school outreach programs. The goals of those programs is not to police youth, but to build relationships with those young people. Whether it's our Badges for Baseball program, our Junior Police Academy, the soccer camp, or our school resource officers, the goal is that that kids in our community get to know our officers, and that our officers get to know the kids in the community, and we build that public trust. Another program we have, I think that's important, is our community education program, crime prevention, and that program that takes us all out into different organizations throughout the community, whether it's neighborhood groups or National Night Out. And again, that's a way of us really not being there to enforce, but really to connect and build trust and educate, I guess, as well, which is very important. Recently, we've received a number of questions, both in preparation for the Q&A today, but also via email on the 8 Can't Wait initiative and our policies around use of force. So I want to address that. It's the policy of Everett Police Department that officers should only use the amount and duration of force that is necessary to perform an urgent lawful duty. The use of any kind of a neck hold is prohibited, except in extreme situations of self-defense or where the officer is protecting another person. We track and investigate hate and bias incidents, including non-criminal incidents, and we're one of the only departments to do that. So we not only track when there's a crime that's a hate crime and we investigate that, but we track when any type of hate incident is reported, whether it was a criminal act or not. We're also, we contribute to the national use of force data collection and hold our officers accountable at a national level. We have a long practice of reviewing applications of force and investigating every complaint regarding use of force by any of our officers. So I can tell you that we have been working very hard over these last few years. Chief Templeman has been a champion of very progressive policies in our police department to ensure a highly trained team of officers here to protect and serve everyone in our city. And most of our policies are following a lot of that 8 Can't Wait campaign. We're finalizing right now a frequently asked question that will more thoroughly address some of the very specific policy questions, and we're going to post that to the website. So if I haven't hit on one of your specific questions, I want to make sure we have all the information accurate on our website, and that should be available to you shortly. There's also been a number of questions that I've received in the last couple of days on whether we'll be defunding the police department. And I know that there's a national movement out there to defund police departments across the country. I think how I understand when I've been reading about what those programs are asking for is they're asking for us to move funds from police to social services, housing, and human services, programs that have over the years been gutted out of our city budgets. And it's interesting how over the course of these years, oh, it looks like I'm being told I need to break for a tech issue. So I'm going to take just a quick break, and hopefully we'll fix it. Sorry about that. I'm back. I'm sorry about that again. My apologies. This is my first time using Facebook Live, and I guess what was happening is the feed was going to my personal page rather than my mayor page. So I'm sorry. I hope everyone's able to find it. And if you missed the first part, I hope you're able to find it later online. And if you missed the second part, I hope you're able to find it later online. But again, please accept my apologies. Hopefully the next time we do this, we'll be better suited to do it. So what I was talking about just before I went took a little tech break is the movement out there right now to defund police departments across the country. And as I've researched and understand that, my understanding is it's asking for us to direct resources out of the police and into social services and programs. And those are programs that over the years have been gutted from government budgets, federal, state, county and city level. And so as those programs have been gutted over years, I believe that the police over time has been the, they're the ones that have had to carry those programs forward. And as many know, our police department officers, they're not social workers. They're not the best equipped to be so active social workers. And so the aspect of saying we need to fund these programs makes a lot of sense to me. So we have a lot of those programs embedded in our police department, again, because that's where the money was available for us to use. And so we have those social workers that are working out of our police department. I'm going to be looking at all aspects of the police budget together with Chief Templeman and trying to determine whether those programs need to stay there or whether they are better suited elsewhere, and how do we take them out of the police and put them back into the programs that we need. But I'll tell you, I need you as a community support, because these are programs I think that I've advocated for my entire career in our community, housing and homelessness and directing dollars into those areas. But I can tell you, as an elected leader, I have not found the voice of the community supporting those dollars invested there. And so to support those types of investment, I really do need your help as a community. Because I absolutely agree that is the way to solve so many of our issues that we see in our cities and across our country. I can tell you we have made a number of cuts to our police department. We didn't make cuts in this recent budget action in personnel, uniform personnel, but we made other cuts. We've cut non-uniform personnel, we've cut vehicles, we've cut equipment, and those types of cuts have added up to more than $1 million just in the last couple of years. So we have definitely made cuts to that department. I also have concerns with reducing the number of officers in the department, and I'll share with you why. And so I look forward to continuing this conversation as we as a community have this conversation around police funding. But when you have officers going out on calls, if you have officers doubled up or even tripled up, it's much safer for everybody. If there's a difficult call, a dangerous situation, and we're sending one officer out, I think that puts the community at greater risk. It puts our officer at greater risk, and it puts the community that the officer is responding to at greater risk. And so those other officers there are help provide a safety net, help they can help hold each other accountable, but they can also be there to ensure that we don't get in a situation where we're going to come into a situation of having to use force, which we don't want to do. So the other thing I think that I'm concerned about with further reducing funding in police is body-worn cameras. Body-worn cameras are necessary in this day and age. We are just now piloting body-worn cameras. I wish we would have had body-worn cameras in our city 10 years ago. We just got funding to do body-worn cameras at a small level, and we are putting that in our budget moving forward so that we can equip all our officers with cameras. And there's an enormous expense with that, and there's also staff costs of having and ensuring that footage is available to our community. So I think that there's a good, healthy conversation we can have around this, but I can tell you I strongly support funding the programs that need to be funded, like housing and human services and behavioral health, and that is the way to tackle some of our issues in our city. So I look forward to furthering that conversation. I also had some questions leading up to this Q&A today on whether we're working with the NAACP and our communities of color. And so yes, we are actively reaching out to communities of color. I've made efforts throughout my time as mayor to try to reach out and hear different voices and include them in the work and conversations. Last year we formed a chief advisory council for our police chief. That includes representatives from some of our communities of color. Just today we had our first listening session on this topic that is so important right now, with some leaders in organizations in our communities of color. And one of the key takeaways that I got from that was that we need to have more of these conversations, and that we can't just do them reactively when something like this is happening across the country, but they really need to be ongoing. And I heard that loud and clear, and so I'm going to work to make that happen. I also seen online that the NAACP is advocating for county and city law enforcement to adopt a number of different initiatives and policies there's like 4 of them, and a couple of them we already have been working on and have in place or getting in place, like the body-worn cameras and extensive training, so I was pleased to see that. And there's a couple others that we need to do more work on, and so I'm going to sit down with our team and take a look at that and see how we can move some of those initiatives forward, and appreciate the recommendations we've received from the NAACP. There are real challenges in the system, and there have been too many incidents of violence across our country, and criminal actions by some in law enforcement, and that is it's inexcusable, and it violates public trust, and so it's I know we're all trying to process what we've witnessed, and we're acting and fighting out and against that, and I'm actively a part of that, and the chief and I are working together to see what we can do to ensure the safety and health and well-being of our community. It's a really difficult time in our nation's history, and I think any time that we're in one of these difficult times, it's an important time and an opportunity to embrace change, and so that's what we're going to be doing. So I know I'm going to run out of time before I get to open-ended questions, so I'm going to try to breeze through some of these other questions that I received ahead of time quickly. And again, I promise to do this again, so if I don't get to your questions, I apologize in advance. There was a number of questions about the budget. We took some emergency actions this year, and folks were concerned about that and what other actions we might take to reduce the budget. So the City of Everett has been dealing with a structural deficit for years. It's something I shared immediately after taking office, that there was concerns. We took some steps. We reduced the budget by $7.6 million and made other short-term cuts to balance the budget, but we were still facing a nearly $13 million deficit for next year. And so we were taking steps to plan and deal with kind of long-term changes that we could make, and then the pandemic hit. And that happened quite swiftly, and there was an immediate blow to the city's budget. So what we were looking to kind of evaluate for 2021, we had to immediately implement for 2020 without evaluation and public discussion. We started with a hiring freeze of all general government jobs, minus the uniformed fire and police positions. We made deep cuts to the executive team, so my office had very significant cuts. We cut M&O, training, travel, and we did cut police and fire in non-uniform position and equipment and vehicles. So we made pretty difficult cuts across the board. We're estimating from this pandemic a $14 million impact in this immediate year. But honestly, looking at the most recent financials, I believe that number is going to go up from here. So we had some very difficult decisions to make, and by making those decisions quickly and early, that we hope to not have to make even deeper cuts later. So I brought together an emergency ordinance that was about $3.4 million in reductions. We focused those reductions on the areas that were already not able to provide services to the community because of the pandemic. So our senior center isn't allowed to be operational right now because of the pandemic. Our swim center, a lot of our recreations and arts programs were not operational. So those were the areas that we focused on some of those cuts, because we knew those things couldn't run anyway. They were hard cuts. They are programs that I love, that my family loves, that I know our community love and really rely on. Things like our senior center, our swim center. We reduced a number of positions, and each one of those positions is a person and a family that has been impacted, and that was really hard for us as a city. And we would have loved to have a very public, robust process around that, but it was an urgent crisis situation, and we needed to really quickly reduce our spending. As we look forward into 2021, we're going to have that open, transparent process that we always have, and we are asking and hoping that you will reach out to us with other ways we can engage and get community input on what you want us to prioritize in where we put our very limited city dollars. I know some of you are wondering, well, are we going to get this program back? Are we going to get this program back? And I can honestly say I don't know. I have not finalized any recommendations for council for the 2021 budget. We're just starting that process, but we don't yet know the financial impact of the pandemic. I have significant concerns that we are not going to have the revenue we need to offer all the services that we want to for our community, and that we're going to have to prioritize those very limited funds. I think it gives us an opportunity as a city to think about the way we deliver services. As we've been having this conversation about the police and whether these types of programs belong in a police department or whether we should put those in human services, I think we need to have that conversation citywide. Is this a program that the city should be delivering, or is there another partner or another way to deliver that same program and service better and to be able to continue to offer that in the city? I know, for example, with the senior center, we're putting together a request for proposals to see if we could find a partner to work with the city to ensure that we can have a fabulous senior center in the community, but maybe there's a way we can do that that will be a better provider than the government is for that type of program. So we will continue to have those conversations. I encourage you to weigh in, because this is going to be important, and your voice is needed in helping determine where we put those dollars. I want to just quickly get to the pandemic. We're in a pandemic, as you all know, and we've been home for much time. This was a really difficult time in our city's history, our world history. We are just now entering phase 2, which gives us that little spark of hope, which has been great. But I really want to share, it's so important we don't let our guards down. You know, when I go to the grocery store, when I'm in an elevator, when I'm in a hallway, I'm wearing my mask, my face covering, and I think it's so important that we do that we really are careful and cautious, because it's so easy to let our guard down, especially as it starts to get warm and we're outside. But we really need to protect public health, because this is a severe issue and it's going to continue for some time. We've put together a few resources to try to help and get us through. We created the Everett for Everett.com site, which has all of these businesses that were open during phase 1, and we're adding the businesses that are now open in phase 2, and we're going to try to continue to update it. So please use that as a resource to find and support local businesses. We have our Everett Cares grant, $1 million in funding that went out to small businesses here. We hope to expand on that grant, because that's just a drop in the bucket for what our small businesses need. And we could not award all of the fabulous applicants that applied. We also have Everett Cares program for public services, so housing, food programs, organizations that are helping our really marginalized communities and communities in poverty. And so those are really important dollars that are going out into our community that I'm pleased to have go through the city of Everett. And then we have a Getting to Safe toolkit. That's just a toolkit for small businesses and organizations to help them reopen safely and protect their staff and protect their clients and visitors, so that we can really continue to keep the pandemic under control here locally. So I know I rushed through those last 2 topics. I wanted to make sure I had time for at least some of your questions. I know one of my team members here has been writing things down, so she's going to hand me some. And I'm trying to get them as close to real time as possible. Okay, so I've got a list of questions here. What is going on with the youth committee, the youth advisory committee, and is there talk about how to support people of color coming into that group? And I think that's what I'm understanding. And yes, so this year we kicked off our first youth advisory board. I was so excited and had a great group of young people from across all our schools, and we only got to have a few meetings and do a little bit of work, and then the pandemic hit, and it's so sad that our first year was just kind of tanked. And so I think that is an important committee moving forward. We did work hard, this first group, to ensure that it was geographically and ethnically and racially diverse group of kids, but it was hard to recruit kids of young people of color to the community, to the committee. Even actively trying to ensure their voices were members of the committee, I think we didn't have the representation that I would like to see. So we will continue to work hard to ensure that communities of color have voices. I want to work hard to ensure communities of color have voices in every single one of our boards of commissions. And with young people, I think I want the same thing. I want to have those young voices on every single one of our boards and commissions, because those are the voices that we don't hear enough from. And so I will continue to do that. There's a question on, as a white person, how do I educate myself on issues facing people of color in our community? How do I lead my staff to ensure Everett is more equitable to the community and people of color? This is a great question, and I ask myself this quite a bit. I try to read as much as possible. I do my very best to listen, and I am a privileged, middle-aged, white presenting woman, and I don't know the experience of our communities of color like our communities of color do. I need to listen to those voices. I need to actively reach out, and as I heard today loud and clear, I need to actively reach out all the time, not just in times of crisis, not just when there's a national event that draws our attention back to this, but always. And so I will work harder to do that. I will work hard to continue to create seats at the table. I can speak as a woman, as the first woman elected mayor. Initially, it was just, how do I even get women seats at the table in city government, because we didn't have that before, and so we've made some progress there. We have not made enough progress in getting equitable representation in leadership, in all city positions, certainly not in elected office, and so I will work hard to be a voice, and I think one of the best things I can do to do that is to really listen and follow the voices of our communities of color. So I'll keep trying to do that. Question, we've recently seen hate symbols and hate groups out in the open in neighboring communities. Do I acknowledge there's racism in Everett? And if so, do I condemn racism, and do I condemn these groups? Yes, there is racism in Snohomish County. There is racism in Everett. And absolutely, I condemn hate groups. I condemn all acts of hate. Hate has no place in our city. It has no place in our county, our state, our world, and sadly it is here. And so I will do everything I can to speak out against these groups. When I was on the council, I created a safe city resolution, really trying to ensure that people understood that our goal as a government was to ensure safety of everybody in our community, especially minorities, immigrant populations, people of color, and people that have been marginalized much of their life. And so I will continue to speak out and do that. I think it's so important that we that we address it when we see it, and work together, because that's the only way we're going to get through this. And then I'm being told I don't have much more time, so the last question I'll get to is, 2020 has been the hardest year ever. Yes, whoever asked that is so true. It's hard for me to feel hopeful about anything. How and what are you doing, if anything, and what are you hopeful about? That is a tough question, because I have come to work many times in the last 3 months not feeling hopeful, and that's not a great place to be, because I do need to find those lights. We all do, and so I think in these times of darkness, it is really hard to find those little kernels of hope. I find hope in young people. Young people, your resilience, your passion, your dedication, your fearlessness in speaking out when you see injustice, that gives me hope. And I guess the whole idea of hope is kind of a neat one. Many of you may know I named my daughter Panda. Her name is actually Pandora. And Pandora has kind of this dark story, because the myth is that, she opened the box and unleashed the evils on mankind. But what I loved about the story of Pandora is she kept hope. And she kept hope, and hope was the last thing in that box, and she kept it and restored hope for mankind. And so that is really, and with my daughter being named Panda, that's kind of this really personal story I have around hope, is that I really do believe that young people are going to bring us that hope into the future. So thank you. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I'll work to do better at this. Really appreciate you even joining it all today, and please continue to send questions. I'll do my best to answer them, and hopefully next time I'll be better at this and we can have more of a real Q&A. But again, thank you, and be safe.